Hello, this is Erin, and for the next hour, I'll be reading from the July 13th, 2026 issue of the New York Times on the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. My first article, How Trump Failed to Secure the Strait of Hormuz and His Iran Deal. President Trump signed an agreement that Iran said gave it the control of the waterway and global energy supplies. Now Iran's military is violently asserting authority. By Edward Wong, Michael Crowley, and Eric Schmitz. For 2 months, under a quiet arrangement with the U.S. Navy, commercial tankers turned off their transponders to avoid detection by Iran as they crossed the perilous Strait of Hormuz to carry oil and gas out to the world. The military offered some air cover in case Iran attacked, as naval officers directed the vessels over the radio to hug Oman's coast opposite Iran's shore. That enabled a steady increase in traffic through the strait from May to June, during an intensive ceasefire in the war. But a framework deal that President Trump signed with Iran last month helped bring that effort to a fiery end because of its language given Iran official power in the strait and its vagueness in important phrases. Mr. Trump celebrated this agreement, reached on June 14th, as the reopening of the strait. "Ships of the world, start your engines," he wrote on social media. "Let the oil flow." But critics say it actually formalized a reality that Iranian officials have made clear throughout the war. They now control the strait. Iran's missile and drone attacks on commercial ships in the strait essentially shut it down soon after the United States and Israel started the war. Then, weeks after the United States and Iran entered a tentative and informal ceasefire in early April, some tankers began taking a southern route through the strait, farther from Iran's coast. Now, by striking last week in that area, Iran is trying to force ships to travel through its territorial waters on the strait's northern side, where Tehran can try to justify charging tolls or fees. Iranian units attacked 3 ships on Tuesday along the southern route. The U.S. military said Mr. Trump responded by ordering airstrikes in Iran. The tensions escalated in an announcement this weekend by Iran's Navy that it had fired on another vessel in the strait and was closing the waterway until the end of U.S. interference in the region. U.S. Central Command said it hit about 140 Iranian military targets in response, for a total of 310 American strikes over the last week. With Mr. Trump warning that he thinks the June agreement is over, global energy prices are surging again, along with fears of a return to all-out war. Before the war, a fifth of the world's oil and liquefied natural gas passed through the strait from producers in the Middle East. The latest crisis is an all-too predictable result of the June agreement, former American officials and analysts say. Facing anger over high gas prices and spiking inflation, Mr. Trump was eager to reopen the strait and relieve pressure on the global economy. Among other things, he agreed to end a U.S. military blockade of Iranian ports and allow Tehran to resume oil sales for 60 days in return to reopening the strait. The June agreement, called a Memorandum of Understanding, also prompted additional negotiations aimed at reaching a broader and more enduring peace plan. While many U.S. and foreign officials welcomed the ceasefire, critics warned that the agreement was dangerously vague, particularly language in its 5th paragraph saying that Iran would make arrangements using its best efforts for the safe passage of commercial vessels through the Strait of Hormuz. No one should be surprised that Iran views that as explicitly giving them an enduring role controlling passage through Hormuz, said Michael Ratney, a retired career diplomat who was the most recent U.S. ambassador to Saudi Arabia. Iran's control obviously gives them powerful leverage, he said, and they appear to be willing to risk a resumption of conflict, perhaps even a collapse of the ceasefire, to maintain that leverage. At a news conference on June 18th, President Vice President J.D. Vance insisted that Mr. Trump's demands about the strait would be enshrined in a future deal. "We have all the cards," he said. "The competition for control of the strait poses a dilemma for shipping companies. Should they pass through the Strait of Hormuz via the southern corridor closer to Oman and risk being attacked by Iran, or should they take the northern Iranian corridor, paying high fees and reinforcing Tehran's claims of authority?" A fraught document. For almost 60 years, commercial ships sailed through the Strait of Hormuz along a route established by the United Nations. Iran's government supported the creation of the route in 1968 and did not try to control it, even though it passed through Iranian territorial waters. The leaders who took power in Iran during the 1979 Islamic Revolution said they were not bound by that UN agreement. Though over the years the government has only occasionally challenged shipping in the strait. That changed after the U.S. and Israeli forces attacked Iran on February 28th. Iran's military quickly began striking commercial ships and laying mines, grinding traffic to a halt. Only those willing to pay large sums to Iran were granted safe passage along its coast. Critics say that Mr. Trump conceded this new status quo in the June agreement with Tehran. At the insistence of Iranian negotiators, that 14-point document acknowledges Iran's power in the strait. It prohibits the charging of tolls or fees, but only for 60 days while negotiations toward another agreement continues. Mr. Trump has said the United States could try to charge tolls. The memorandum also does not include an ironclad guarantee that ships can safely sail any portion of the strait. Iranian officials and diplomatic experts say the final line formally ceded to Iran a central role in managing the strait. The Islamic Republic of Iran will conduct dialogue with the Sultanate of Oman to define the future administration and maritime services in the Strait of Hormuz, in discussion with other Persian Gulf littoral states, in line with the applicable international law and the sovereign rights of coastal states of the Strait of Hormuz. At the time, Mr. Trump praised the agreement as a return to free navigation through the strait. But Iranian officials were soon citing it as grounds for dictating where ships should sail, namely along a route near Iran's coastline. Dennis Ross, a former longtime Middle East negotiator for presidents of both parties, said Iran's view of the agreement was clear. "You were opening the strait, but only on the condition that Iran was completely in control and that any other routes are not acceptable," Mr. Ross said. Hussein Abish, a scholar of the Arab Gulf States Institute, a research and advocacy group, said all of the international law goes in one direction and the MOU goes in the other direction. Asked for comment, the White House referred to a Friday phone briefing that it had arranged for reporters on the condition that the U.S. officials speaking not be named. An American official involved in the negotiations said that Iran knew during the talks the ships were using a route near the Oman coast and had even fired drones at some of them. That meant when Iran agreed to make best efforts for safe passage, it would not launch attacks there, the official said. Naval guidance. Iranian negotiators knew that they had leverage over the Americans as they discussed the proposed agreement in the early summer. On May 4th, the American military started an operation called Project Freedom to begin operating the strait by escorting stranded commercial ships. Mr. Trump abandoned the effort in less than 48 hours after the Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia, fearing Iranian retaliation, refused to allow the Americans to use Saudi airspace for the venture. The Pentagon then tried a more subtle effort, mainly involving radio guidance. Since early May, U.S. forces have given route guidance along Oman to more than 800 commercial vessels carrying 400 million barrels of crude oil, said Captain Tim Hawkins, a spokesman for U.S. Central Command, which oversees the American military in the Middle East. The ships followed a route designated by the International Maritime Organization, a London-based arm of the United Nations that regulates global shipping. The organization established the route in consultation with Oman to try to evacuate some 600 long stranded vessels. An informal ceasefire turned into a formal one with the signing of the June agreement, and the 7 days starting June 20th, nearly 400 ships transited the strait, according to Kepler, a maritime data firm. That was the highest number in 1 week period since the war began. But on Thursday, after Iran's attacks, just 22 ships went through the strait. More than a dozen U.S. Navy warships, including 2 aircraft carriers, and scores of carrier and land-based attack and surveillance planes, are still operating in the general area of the Arabian Sea. The U.S. military is also conducting mine detection missions in the strait using autonomous seacraft. U.S. forces have held Iran accountable for its unwarranted aggression toward commercial shipping while still facilitating passage through the strait, Captain Hawkins said. However, he added there is no guarantee that American military guidance will protect commercial ships transitioning the strait. The Iranian passage. During the height of the war, some shipping operators chose to sail closer to Iran and rely on the Iranian military's guarantee of safe passage. Iran told them they would have to pay up to $2 million per ship. Iran has said that any ships transiting the strait must follow the route and get permission to do so from the Persian Gulf Strait Authority, a body Tehran created in May. Until it paused the practice under the terms of the June ceasefire, Iran insisted that the fees were for safety and environmental services. Some experts call the contrived attempt by Iran to appear compliant with the United Nations Convention of the Law of the Sea, which allows such fees under specific conditions. In fact, they say Iran is actually establishing de facto tolls, which the convention outlaws. Iran signed but never ratified the convention, so it says the terms do not apply to it. The United States also has never ratified the convention. The United States and some other countries rejected Iran's demand that ships use the northern route, and in response, the U.S. military established a southern route in May along Oman's coast. After signing the agreement last month with Iran, Mr. Trump declared that the route was totally safe, secure, and pristine. But as Iran and the United States vie for leverage, mainly using their militaries, risks to shipping companies could increase, said Dan Elamaru, the chief geopolitical strategist at Alpine Macro, an investment research firm. Iran has suffered economic pain, but may be willing to endure more. Mr. Trump last week reinstated a U.S. ban on Iranian oil sales that he temporarily waived last month, but he has yet to reimpose a naval blockade of Iran's ports. Mr. El-Marou said the question in which cracks first, the Iranian economy or the global economy. You are listening to a reading of articles and features from the New York Times on the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. Next article is Prosecutors Went to Prison to Ask the Prisoners How to Fight Crime. What might stop kids from committing crimes? A group of district attorneys went to San Quentin, once one of California's most infamous prisons, to ask the inmates for advice. By Shayla Dewan. Except for the portraits of Jesus, the chapel in California's oldest prison is reminiscent of a high school gymnasium with cinder block walls and a high, narrow strip of windows. On a recent day, it was the venue for an unusual 6-hour event in which the people in prison had a chance to talk to the people who put them there. About 60 men in dusky blue work shirts, referred to as inside people, congregated with about 20 people in darker business attire, outside people, a contingent of district attorneys and their staff members. It was the first time that Eric Nasarenko, a district attorney for Ventura County, had visited a prison in his 18 years as a prosecutor. Gripping and grinning, he worked through the crowd. "What high school did you go to?" he asked one inmate who was from Long Beach. "Wilson," the man said affably, "for one day. Then I went to juvenile hall." Prosecutors rarely visit prisons and even more rarely converse at length with people doing hard time. This was the second annual such meeting convened by Brooke Jenkins, the top prosecutor in San Francisco, who said that both sides stood to gain from the experience. Prosecutors could ask prisoners for ideas about what interventions might have prevented their younger selves from committing crimes, and prisoners could tell their stories of redemption to the very officials who might review their request for parole or a shortened sentence. The location itself, on a stretch of Bay Area waterfront, was a draw for the outside people. Once the infamous home of California's death chamber, the prison has undergone a rebrand. 3 years ago, its name was changed from the San Quentin State Prison to the San Quentin Rehabilitation Center, where prisoners have access to therapeutic and job training programs and can work on the hit podcast Ear Hustle, the San Quentin News, which is distributed at prisons around the state, or in a soon-to-open cafe. Prosecutor visits to San Quentin began in 2012 with George Gascon, Ms. Jenkins' predecessor. Understanding the rehabilitation process helped prosecutors make better decisions, Mr. Gascon said then. For her part, Ms. Jenkins has supported proposals by San Quentin prisoners to ensure that the money they pay to the courts goes to crime victims first, before fines and fees, and for single occupancy cells to make prisoners feel safer and more productive. The first idea became state law, the latter passed in the state assembly last year. After bagels and coffee, a microphone was passed around the chapel for introductions. The chief prosecutor for Merced County turned out to be seated between a man convicted of carjacking and another convicted of murder. The acting district attorney for Yolo County was rubbing elbows with the former police officer who had kidnapped and raped women and the man who killed his own son. Many of the residents had worked their way from rougher institutions to San Quentin, where they are encouraged to come to terms with the harm that they had caused. Several mentioned their victims by name and made a point of saying they had been rightfully convicted. The day's chosen moderator, an inside person, invited everyone in the room to take 2 deep breaths in unison. "We just heard a lot of accountability," he said, "and I really believe in self-care." State prison officials permitted the New York Times to observe the event on the condition that prisoners not be identified, except for a handful who were selected to give interviews. After a panel discussion, the outside people were given a tour of the new learning complex, with floor-to-ceiling windows and benches fashioned from gargantuan wooden beams. Stephen Wagstaff, the district attorney of San Mateo County, who has been a prosecutor for 49 years, was attending for the second time. In California at large, I'm one that would be described as one of the public safety, law and order harsh types. I fully acknowledge that's what I am, he said, but he added, this is spectacular. This is what we ought to be doing. Mr. Wagstaff said he did not approve of recent changes to California law that allowed prisoners to seek relief from sentences that can exceed 100 years, even if crimes where no lives were lost. But he had made one adjustment since his last visit, he said. I went back to my office and put in a rule that nobody in my office can request a 3-digit sentence without my review and approval. He gestured toward a San Quentin resident. I see people like this gentleman, and I think, he doesn't have to die here. For the next 2 hours, the inmates and the prosecutors gathered in smaller sessions that one DA described as inmate-led focus groups. Among the topics, the difficulty of determining when a prisoner is truly rehabilitated, whether prosecutors could hire people with the lived experience or having done time ways to expand prisoner mentoring of at-risk youth, and how to get hip-hop songs recorded by prisoners and aimed at deglamorizing violence into the hands of DJs. Prosecutors asked what might have kept the inmates from committing crimes in the first place. To be honest, I don't know if I could have told anything to my younger self to stop the journey that I was on, said Ryan Pagan, who is serving 77 years for a murder he committed as a teenager. Now he makes podcasts and documentary films. People had tried to scare him straight, he said, but he did not listen. I feel like I needed prison, Miss Jenkins protested. That makes me feel hopeless, she said. Jason Jenkins said it might have helped if someone had been around to cultivate his talent for basketball, but his mother had gone to prison for dealing drugs when he was 5, and his father had been shot and killed by the police. No one ever showed up to my basketball games, he said. Toyisi Matangi, who regularly speaks to high school students as part of San Quentin mentorship program, said it was more important to listen to kids than to scare them. If he could talk to his younger self, he would say that the abuse he experienced as a child was not his fault. But, he would add, we can do something to get you out of there and stop thinking that violence is okay. Next article, How Little House Welcomes Native Neighbors. The real Ingalls family built their little house on the prairie on Osage land and evinced racist attitudes. A new TV adaptation tries to reckon with this while preserving the story's heart, by Robert Ito. In Little House on the Prairie, the third book in Laura Ingalls Wilder's series of beloved frontier novels, there's a chapter titled Indians in the House. In it, a pair of naked wild men who have horribly bad smell, they're wearing skunk skins and communicate via harsh grunts, visit the family home where they swipe Pa's tobacco and help themselves to Ma's fresh baked cornbread. In the new Netflix adaptation of the children's classic, which premieres on Thursday, Laura offers their unexpected guests cornbread and coffee and chats with one of them about her dog. Through subtitled dialogue, we learn that Osage men feel entitled to a bit of hospitality because the Ingalls are squatting on their land and helping themselves to the tribe's lumber, water, and game. The historical truth of this encounter lies somewhere in the middle. The Ingalls were indeed squatters, illegally building their little house on the land that wasn't theirs. The Osage were the people being robbed, not the other way around. We wanted to face that part head on, said Rebecca Sonnenschein, the showrunner, but there is no evidence that the Osage discussed why they felt entitled to the family's cornbread and coffee that day, not that Laura would have understood if they had. The creators of the new Netflix series wanted to present a more complete and nuanced account of the Ingalls in what was then called Indian Territory. They faced a daunting challenge incorporating the truth about the Osage experience into the Little House narrative while also preserving the story's heart. The books are very one-sided, Sonnenschein said. There is no characterization of the Osage, so we tried to show things from their POV as much as possible and to make them just as complex and interesting as the Ingalls. The novels also include troubling lines like the only good Indian is a dead Indian spoken by a neighbor, which have diminished Wilder's reputation in recent years. In 2018, the American Library Association removed her name from one of its most prestigious awards, citing her book's dated cultural attitudes towards indigenous people and people of color. According to Caroline Fraser, who wrote the Pulitzer Prize-winning biography Prairie Fires, The American Dreams of Laura Ingalls Wilder, the author didn't have any real understanding of who these people were or what their culture was like, even as an adult writing the book. To bring the story of the modern age, the show's creators have incorporated sympathetic, complex Osage characters, including a family, the Mitchells, whose young daughter, Good Eagle, Wren Gotts, becomes Laura's best friend. They also added historical context about the Osage diminished reserve in Kansas, and the Ingalls family move into it. That's what it means to adapt something in the present day, Sonnenschein said. You take the piece of literature and all the knowledge you have now, and you make something new that re-examines something that happened. Fans of the original TV series, which starred Michael Landon as a family patriarch and ran from 1974 to 1983, may wonder at the changes as well. Where is the town of Walnut Grove, or Nellie Olson, Laura's loathsome arch-nemesis? But unlike the new series, which was actually adapted from Wilder's Little House on the Prairie, the original was based largely on her latter book, On the Banks of Plum Creek, set years after the Ingalls moved off the Osage land. Fraser disliked the TV series, particularly that Landon, who also was an executive producer and directed many episodes, took a story about a plucky, high-spirited girl and transformed it into a star vehicle for himself. I thought his show was terrible, she said. He always defended himself by saying that whatever you think of the show, he had inspired thousands of people to pick up the books and read them, but he also exposed people to a lot of stereotypes. Julie O'Keefe, the reboot's Osage cultural consultant, previously worked on projects including Martin Scorsese's Killers of the Flower Moon and the Netflix Western American Primeval. She grew up on the Osage Nation Reservation in northeastern Oklahoma and remembers watching Little House with her grandmother. Everyone had brown face on, she said, recalling the costumes and makeup. Everyone looked like an Apache. On the new version, O'Keefe's responsibilities included overseeing language lessons and consulting on casting, sometimes both at the same time. Taylor Redcorn was hired to teach Osage to the actors who played the Mitchells, and he ended up playing a tribal leader. for a crucial moment involving a historic meeting of elders. Those 7 chiefs that sat in front, every one of them were Osage, O'Keefe said. And boy, you could really feel it when they were shooting this scene. O'Keefe also helped the props department find or create more than 3,000 native items, shell necklaces, otter fur hats, headdresses made with real porcupine quills, many of them by artisans within the Osage Nation. The show's set designers constructed an Osage village, including a period authentic lodge made from canvas and buffalo hides. Osage singers also contributed a new song about the Drum Creek Treaty of 1870. Its signing is dramatized in the series, which moved the Osage out of Kansas into what is now Oklahoma. We never sing anything that's traditional for TV shows, O'Keefe said. It's always something new, so that if it gets out there and a car dealership wants to sell a Toyota or whatever with it, we're not worried about our traditional songs being out there. O'Keefe's role as a cultural consultant required her to navigate between 2 worlds. You're trying to be amenable to everyone on conversations about things that can often be very difficult, like racism and how natives feel in Hollywood, she said. I have to have true respect and prove my credibility to Indian country first. And then it's to the team that I'm working with. At one point, Laura, who is being homeschooled by her mother, Caroline, alongside her sister Mary, invites Good Eagle to come do school with her. Ma was a teacher before she married Pa, she tells her friend, and school would be so fun for her there. But Good Eagle's mother, White Sun, isn't having it. Who knows what kind of nonsense they'd teach her, she tells her husband. That feeling is understandable to Alyssa Wapantke, Peter Pan, and Wendy Riverdale, who plays White Sun. She doesn't know where they might take Good Eagle, she said, while she became totally colonized after being taught by a white woman who doesn't know their traditions and cultures. She doesn't trust them, and rightfully so. Caroline Ingalls doesn't trust the Osage either. In the original books published in the 1930s and 40s, her fear and hatred of Indians is intense and lifelong. But in one of the series' most surprising twists, she ends up befriending White Sun and teaching her young daughter. For Sonnenschein, the showrunner, the character arc isn't totally far-fetched. If she had more perspective and information and education, she probably could have gotten there, she said of Caroline Ingalls. If you don't want to see people evolve, you've got 100 years of film and television to look at, she continued. We can keep telling people the same stories over and over again, or we can teach people that it is possible to change. You are listening to a reading of articles and features from the New York Times on the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. Next article, after being delayed by Trump, a Canada-U.S. bridge is set to open. A deal ended the Trump administration's blocking of a new bridge that will ease congestion at the busiest trade corridor between the United States and Canada by Ian Austin and Tyler Pager. Despite the best efforts of President Trump, the Gordie Howe International Bridge connecting Detroit and Windsor, Ontario, will open on July 27th, the Government of Canada announced on Friday evening. The soaring $6.4 billion Canadian structure has reshaped the skylines of the 2 border cities, which roughly $300 million in trade flows each day. It is also precisely the kind of large infrastructure project Prime Minister Mark Carney has championed as a bulwark against the economic damage caused by Mr. Trump's trade war with Canada. Officials in Canada and the United States said on Friday that the 2 countries had reached a deal about how tolls would be distributed, allowing the bridge to finally open. Thank you and congratulations to the Canadian government, Mr. Trump said in a social media post Friday night. May we both have many years of success with this wonderful new development. The bridge was largely finished early this year, nearly 13 years after Canada and Michigan signed an agreement that allowed construction to begin, a timeline stretched by pandemic-related delays. In February, Mr. Trump said in a rambling social media post that he intended to block the bridge's opening. A ceremony scheduled for early June was called off after invitations had already gone out, and the Trump administration spent the months that followed his first post offering shifting explanations for the president's opposition. Mr. Trump's initial post came hours after Matthew Moran, the billionaire scion of the family that has owned the Ambassador Bridge upstream from the Gordie Howe Bridge since 1979, met in Washington with Commerce Secretary Howard Lutnick, the New York Times reported. Less than a month before the meeting, Mr. Moran had donated $1 million to super PACs supporting the president. Mr. Trump's early objections included a desire to punish Canada for what he described as its exploitation of the American economy and its renewed trade ties with China. He also falsely claimed that no American workers or steel had been used in the bridge's construction. Then, Pete Hoekstra, the United States ambassador to Canada, indicated that the Trump administration was upset about the toll arrangement worked out by Canada and Michigan in 2012. Canada bore the full cost of construction, and the bridge is jointly owned by Canada and Michigan. Under the original agreement, once tolls recover the construction costs, perhaps 50 years from now, the two governments would split any revenue not needed for maintenance and operations. Mr. Hoekstra, who also falsely claimed that it was a hoax that Canada paid for the bridge, later suggested the United States was looking for a way for Michigan to see revenue from the bridge sooner. Under the new agreement, the Canadian official said half of the tolls, after deducting operation expenses, will go into a regional economic development fund for the first 15 years of operation. A U.S. official said that the money will be collected by the United States government, and the development fund will only be available to Americans. The United States will also have to approve toll increases beyond 10%. A U.S. official said previously, tolls were to be managed by an authority composed of representatives of Canada and Michigan. Michigan's government was initially cool to federal intervention on tolls, though its position has since softened. It's good for Michigan workers, and it's good for Michigan's auto industry. Stacy LaRouche, the press secretary for Governor Gretchen Whitmer, said in a statement last month, "This project has been a tremendous example of bipartisan and international cooperation." On Friday, Ms. Whitmer welcomed the end of the saga. "The Gordie Howe International Bridge has always been a great deal for our state," she said in a statement. "I'm proud to have fought for its opening and congratulate my partners who have worked on this issue alongside me for years." The Morans, who had made their fortune largely through trucking before expanding into real estate, have long been unpopular on both sides of the border. In Detroit, many of their decaying landmark properties became unwelcome symbols of the city's struggles. Across in Windsor, the Ambassador Bridge is a notoriously bad neighbor. At times, poor maintenance caused pieces of the bridge to crash to the ground. The bridge company further tarnished its reputation when it bought a swath of neighborhood in preparation for its unfulfilled new bridge. The houses were boarded up and left to rot. For a critical trade crossing, the Ambassador Bridge is oddly disconnected from expressways. The long lines of trucks traveling to and from it are forced into a gear-grinding slog along a city road lined with traffic lights. Fare hikes on the Ambassador Bridge have prompted large numbers of commercial drivers to detour and cross on a bridge that has its ownership split between Michigan and Canada about 100 miles to the north between Port Huron, Michigan, and Sarnia, Ontario. Next article, museum spreads 800 pounds of peanut butter in tribute to Dutch artist. An installation honoring the artist Wim T. Schippers features a 270-square-foot hexagon spread on the floor of a museum in Rotterdam by Nathan Odenheimer. Peanut butter is typically more of a pantry staple than an art supply, but 800 pounds of the creamy spread are the centerpiece of museum installation that opened on Thursday in the Netherlands in honor of the artist Wim T. Schippers, who died last month at 83. The installation features a 270-square-foot hexagon spread on the floor of the Depot of Museum in Rotterdam. The museum's acting director, Sandra Kisters, said visitors can follow the smell from the atrium at the entrance up to the exhibition and the third-floor gallery. Schippers was a beloved and eccentric cultural figure in the Netherlands, where he produced provocative television shows, wrote poetry, composed music, and once directed a play performed entirely by German shepherds. Before he died, he left strict instructions on the application of the nutty paste for peanut butter floor. The installation must use 3.2 pounds of smooth peanut butter, never the chunky kind, for every square foot, and it must be spread as evenly as possible, according to a statement from the museum. Two museum workers using taping knives to spread buckets of peanut butter donated by the Dutch manufacturer Calv, the brand shippers endorsed for its spreadability, the total volume used in the installation is equivalent to roughly 860 standard 16-ounce jars of peanut butter. The museum advises visitors with allergies to avoid entering the exhibit area as a precaution, though it is noted that there was only a small risk of serious symptoms. Shippers first envisioned covering a large museum hall floor with peanut butter in the 1960s, but the plan didn't materialize until a 1989 exhibition. The concept was later purchased by the museum for 50,001 euros and exhibited in 2011, said Jarrell X, a former director of the museum and friend of the artist. X said the installation always attracted significant attention, particularly from children fascinated by the vast quantities of peanut butter on the floor. It's both a parody of art and an invitation to think about art differently, he said. Wim liked scandals and provoking his audience. Like his work, the Dutch artist's final resting place is also unconventional. A few close friends buried him last month in a remote wooded area east of Amsterdam, leaving no gravestone or lasting marker. Schipper's body was lowered into the grave to a live saxophone performance of a melody of Thelonious Monk, one of his favorite musicians, according to Titus Muselaar, his friend of 40 years, and the chairman of Wim T. Schipper's Foundation, which was established in 2024 to preserve the artist's legacy. Muselaar was among the few who attended the funeral, said that even though Peanut Butter Floor was Schipper's most famous work of visual art, he did not have any appetite for paste. For nut lovers, however, the museum's cafeteria had added a peanut butter sandwich to its menus for visitors to enjoy this summer. Next article, how teaching AI endangered languages can help save them by feeding centuries-old nursery rhymes and folklore recordings into their own model. Linguists in Louisiana hope to help a community control its digital destiny by Jonathan Abrams. While relaxing a couple of years ago, Professor Joshua Caffrey found himself in the mood to unwind with some old-time Cajun music. He asked Amazon's Alexa to play selections from Dewey Balfa, a celebrated fiddler and singer credited with popularizing the genre. Instead, Alexa frustratingly steered him to the catalog of modern pop artist Dua Lipa, Caffrey said. I love Dua Lipa, said Caffrey, the director of the Center for Louisiana Studies at the University of Louisiana at Lafayette. Don't get me wrong, but it seems problematic if you're interested in a different kind of culture and you want to surround yourself with the music of your region. That, to some degree, is threatening my hold on these things I love. Louisiana French, the oral dialect of which Balfa was a cultural guardian, is part of the Bayou societal DNA, a link to its history, music, and identity. Today, Caffrey described the language as struggling and endangered, a notion reinforced by Alexa's overlooking Balfa. In response, Caffrey assembled a small team at the center to train its own language learning model in automatic speech recognition for Louisiana French, drawing from a trove of historical artifacts and interviews. Over the months, as the learning language model is trained on bits of the language, such as an old-age French nursery rhyme, it brings centuries-old dialect closer into the digital age. It's scary how fast all this happened, Caffrey said. I don't even think I knew a large language model existed 2 years ago. Now they're everywhere. The efforts are part of inroads of preserve dialects at risk of being lost and a bridge of disconnect between large language model machines while maintaining a community's ability to control its own digital destiny. In the United States, questions exist over how to preserve languages like Louisiana French, the English-based Creole language of some coastal regions in the Atlantic Southeast, and Appalachian English in the modern digital age. Globally, researchers at the University of Edinburgh are using artificial intelligence to strengthen and revive Scottish Gaelic and Manx. Google recently announced the availability of voice recordings of nearly 30 sub-Saharan African languages to help build tools like voice assistants and translation apps. The consequences of the language gap can be far greater than an AI assistant confusing musical artists, said Christine Mallinson, a professor of language literacy and culture at the University of Maryland, Baltimore County. The importance of accurate speech recognition becomes greater as important tasks like job hiring and medical transcriptions become more automated and digitized, she said. Social differences are encoded in language, Mallinson said. There's accents, patterns of grammar, word choice, Those differences are connected to our families, our neighborhoods, our age and gender, and racial and ethnic and cultural backgrounds, and where we grew up. If AI speech systems make more errors for speakers of underrepresented languages or language varieties, then there can be a serious downstream consequences, she continued. For centuries, Louisiana French was the predominant language spoken in South Louisiana. In 1921, a new state constitution declared English the primary language. Many parents stopped teaching their children the language out of fear of discrimination. The students who spoke Louisiana French in class were often punished with knuckle rappings. A reversal came in 1968 when the Council for the Development of French in Louisiana was created to advance French largely through education and community initiatives. In 2023, the Advocate of Baton Rouge estimated about 120,000 Louisianans still spoke French. Caffery grew up in Franklin, Louisiana, an antebellum town on Bayou Teche. As a child, he ate Cajun and Creole food. His grandparents sometimes sang old French songs and passed along phrases in the language. Whether you spoke it or speak it, the language is floating in the air, he said. There's this feeling of there is this beautiful thing that we want to hang on to. His work to do just that is painstakingly detailed. The Center of Louisiana Studies houses a vast trove of Cajun and Creole folklore recordings that include over 12,000 hours of oral histories, field recordings, and music performances recorded on everything from wax cylinders to reel-to-reel tape. Barry Jean Ancelet, a professor emeritus at the University of Louisiana at Lafayette, is a cultural activist who has donated much of his recording collection, which dates back to the 1970s. The language is almost entirely preserved in vocal recordings. A lot of it is sung in the language, and it's something that's vanishing, Caffery said. Just in the same way you'd want food that's local to your region, it's important to have cultural that is local to the region that makes you feel rooted and certain. Initially, Caffery and his team fed some of Louisiana French recordings into an automated speech recognition model trained in standard English. The results, he said, were better than anticipated, but contained enough errors to render them unusable. To reduce the flaws, the linguists Amanda LaFleur and Colby Lejeune have described audio from the songs and interviews to build what they term as ground truth data set for the artificial intelligence tool to learn from. Peyton Latham Bowe, a research scientist, is working with the open source model they have named the Tatel, a monster or boogeyman in Louisiana French. On a recent weekday, a group met on the second floor of the center, housed inside the J. Arthur Roy House, a renovated white frame Queen Anne mansion. On a large monitor, Latham Bowe displayed side-by-side comparisons taken from a snippet of Sam and Jesse Stafford signing a classic French nursery rhyme nearly a century ago. On the left, the screen showed the outcome with the help of LaFleur and Lejeune's transcriptions. The right depicted the results without the model. "Oh, what's that?" LaFleur asked, trying to decipher a portion of the text of the untrained model. "It's not Hebrew or Arabic." "Definitely not Arabic," Lejeune said. "Oh, it's Hindi," LaFleur said. "That's one of the interesting things is that if you give it, say, really chunky, really crunchy audio, or if you give it music, it will just generate random characters and will predict that this is the language," Latham Bowe said. The variations in the two transcriptions caught LaFleur's attention. LaFleur turned to how the trained model conjugated the past tense of to have in Louisiana French. It actually came up with this spelling, which is uniquely Louisianian, LaFleur said. It recognized it as something that we gave it. It didn't give it out of ChatGPT or all the other millions of data. That's us, so that's exciting. The trained model was not 100% accurate, but a marked improvement over the standard model. The group will input what the model missed, fine-tune it, and feed it back again. If you train it enough on the right information, it will theoretically eventually do it the right way, Caffery said. Caffery is also a musician who performed on Grammy-nominated albums based in Louisiana music. He hopes the model will eventually allow musicians who are not fluent in Louisiana French to read lyrics and become inspired. And yes, he still hopes to one day ask Alexa for Dua Lipa and not hear Dua Lipa. AI is potentially a very powerful tool in our arsenal to try to preserve and galvanize and stimulate tradition, he said. Not tradition as a static thing of just preserving old things, but making sure that gears of tradition remain lubricated and that people keep creating within tradition. You are listening to a reading of articles and features from the New York Times and the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. Article Inside the Secret Factory That Supplies Ukraine's War Drones. With its mass-produced and inexpensive AI-powered war machines, the German startup Helsing SE illustrates a profound shift in military spending by Vivian Walt. At a secret location in southern Germany, the manager of a drone factory owned by Helsing SE, Europe's most valuable artificial intelligence defense startup, hands me a lethal killing machine to cradle in my arms. Weighing just 26 pounds, the black, hard foam attack drone is so light and looks so simple that it is easy to forget its role in a surging multi-billion-dollar industry, the Russia-Ukraine war, and maybe even in Europe's future security. For decades, Western governments have ordered supplies like tanks, fighter jets, and submarines from contractors such as Lockheed Martin or Northrop Grumman. Those items take years to deliver and are dizzyingly expensive. An F-35 jet can run over $100 million. That sort of multi-year government contract still accounts for a lot of military spending. But the current trend is clear. Defense technology is becoming cheaper and nimbler with breakthroughs developed by privately funded companies rather than governments. There's a transition in defense economics, said Alexander Blanchard, a senior researcher in AI governance at the Stockholm International Peace Research Institute. Of the Pentagon's $1.5 trillion budget request for next year, about $55 billion is earmarked for the creation of a new unmanned AI-powered arsenal. On a more modest scale, the EU is piloting a program to fund AI defense companies. These budgets are expected to grow. The defense technology has become a booming area for venture capital. Helsing, like other far smaller defense startups, has already flipped the script on sluggish governments by harnessing the type of disruptive innovation more common in Silicon Valley, tapping billions in venture capital and hiring top tech talent. The companies, some of whose top ranks migrated from Palantir, Tesla, Apple, and Meta, set out to mass-produce war machines costing as little as 17,500 pounds, powered by AI. They require minimal military personnel and barely a week's training, and the drones have been battle-tested under fire in Ukraine. Few companies illustrate the profound shift in the way military spend as clearly as does Helsing, a 5-year-old Munich-based startup. This month, the firm allowed DealBook to be the first U.S. journalist inside its drone factory. A stealth factory. Situated in a serene suburban industrial complex, the factory operates under watertight security. DealBook agreed not to disclose its location, and other tenants in the complex are kept unaware of its existence. Helsing's name appears nowhere. The company fears the factory could be a prime target for sabotage or attack, given the thousands of drones assembled here have been deployed against Russian forces in Ukraine. The factory is able to be dismantled and relocated within a day in case of a threat. The 100 or so factory workers, many of whom were recently laid off by flagging German car makers, undergo extensive security vetting and sign non-disclosure agreements. Painted on one wall is a motivational slogan reading, "Protecting Our Democracies." When Helsing's 3 founders started the company in 2021 with seed funding from Spotify founder Daniel X venture capital firm, they had one mission: stave off Russian threats and fast. The urgency was clear, or at least clear to us, said the company's co-founder and co-chief executive Gunbert Scherf, who was previously an advisor to Germany's defense ministry and a partner at McKinsey. There was a need to do more in defense and give Europe a stronger footing. Yet with Russia's invasion of Ukraine still a year away, investors were unconvinced. At the time, it was virtually impossible to raise money for defense in Europe, Scherf said. The onrush of investments. There has been a seismic change since then, and not solely because of the war in Ukraine. President Trump's demands for Europe to increase its military spending and his repeated threats to take control of Greenland have helped push defense budgets much higher. A flurry of investments in defense tech startups has followed. DealBook hears investors have rushed to participate in Helsing's latest funding round, which was initially estimated to be $1.2 billion, valuing the company at about $18 billion, according to the Financial Times. The market opportunities are enormous, and there is no one company that is going to capture it, said Raviraj Jain, a partner of Lightspeed, which he said has so far invested more than $100 million in Helsing. For investors, Helsing's key advantage comes from its role in the grueling combat in Ukraine, where Helsing has deployed thousands of drones since late 2024. Those missions provide Helsing a trove of data, allowing it to update its software regularly. Ukrainian soldiers record many attacks on video for mission success analysis. There is so much more at stake here, Shriv said. These technologies move very fast. Cat and mouse video games. The videos from Ukraine show a cat and mouse game, a so-called loitering munition or kamikaze drone, the HX-2, the X is for its crossed wings, hovers over the battlefield, picking out minuscule Russian targets like battery systems and armored vehicles camouflaged in forests. When Ukrainian soldiers who operate the drone from many miles away give the go-ahead, it swoops down and eviscerates the threat, often under fire. Shriv said mission success rates in Ukraine were around 70%, something we are very proud of. The AI software allows the drones to continue functioning even if their communication systems and GPS are disabled by Russia's well-honed electronic jammers. I don't know any other Western company that has got the autonomy Helsing has, said Khalid Halou, a partner at the London-based venture capital firm Plural, which he says has invested about $800 million in defense companies, including Helsing. Helsing's next innovation sits on a sun-baked airfield 90 minutes by car west of Munich, where aircraft engineers are building the company's first unmanned fighter jet, named CA-1 Europa. Made with lightweight carbon fiber, the jet should be capable of striking deep inside an adversary like Russia by the time it is deployed in 2029. The aim is simple. For a small fraction of the cost of one regular fighter jet, Helsing can, in theory, produce hundreds of Europas. It can send one ahead to jam the enemy's electronic network, followed by several attack jets, all loaded with precision-guided weapons similar to those found on an F-35. If you don't have a pilot, you can conduct completely different, more dangerous missions, said Stephanie Lingman, Helsing's vice president for its air programs. You are no longer thinking about the human life you have to protect. That calculus is clear in the U.S., too. A Pentagon spokesman, Sean Parnell, told the U.S. Naval Institute this month that drones and autonomous systems represent the most consequential battlefield innovation of this generation. A crowded market. For all Helsing's whiz-bang AI, it is possible that the proliferation of defense tech startups could confound investors or even turn them off. Defense tech, because of all the interest, has become a very noisy place, Shriv said. There are a lot of new players, and that makes it hard for investors, the public, and the governments. But few believe the demand for unmanned warfare will subside anytime soon. And in Helsing's drone factory, the outline of the next potential conflict in Europe is already taking shape. In a large storage room, dozens of boxes are stacked several feet high, many containing drones awaiting shipment not to Ukraine but to a battle-ready German brigade stationed in Lithuania near the Belarus border. Germany's parliament this week approved a $220 million military contract for Helsing to develop a broad range of AI systems. Ballooning military spending might be good for investors, but it could signal tough times for the world. A lot of it hangs on thinking that we are on course for a larger conflict in Europe, Blanchard said. You don't grow your arms industry because you are expecting a generation of peace. Non-disclosure in Roswell new UFO docs are a declassified bummer by Reese Tebalt. Like so many Earthlings, John Darr came to Roswell, New Mexico looking for answers, yet he left the city's annual UFO festival this month with even more questions. Tell us one way or the other, is there or are there not aliens? This was supposed to be the summer of revelation. President Trump had promised to unveil all of the government's secrets about unidentified flying objects and their extraterrestrial passengers. Adding to the hype was Steven Spielberg's newly released lore-steeped blockbuster, but with its own convincing footage of the fabled alien crash at Roswell. But when the Department of Defense began publishing tranches of material on UFOs, or in a Pentagon parlance, UAPs, unidentified anomalous phenomena, the promise of a real-life disclosure day frittered into disappointment du jour. Roswell's UFO festival over the 4th of July weekend was supposed to be sweet vindication for thousands of UFOologists. Instead, they bemoaned the cover-up that they feared would never end. "It's nothing new," said Donald Schmidt, an author of the lead investigator at Roswell's International UFO Museum and Research Center. "It's the same game that they have played all these years. Once again, we're getting the carrot dangled in front of us. Even if Roswell was short on answers, a trip to the nation's UFO capital at least provided some temporary relief. From here, there was no stigma. There was hardly any doubt. Downtown streetlights are painted to look like aliens, and little green men stand sentry outside car washes and banks. All in homage to the purported UFO crash in 1947 known as the Roswell Incident. The Interstellar Festival is now the city's biggest holiday." "We heard this was the Mardi Gras of UFOs," said John Wilson, who traveled from Florida with his wife to see for himself. "There were costume contests, pet and human, a laser light show, a rowdy parade, and a long line of alien-themed shops and food stalls." Still amid the mix of holiday weekend patriotism and interplanetary fervor, there was an undercut of frustration. The 3 batches of files, which contain murky photos, grainy videos, and heavily redacted documents, may appear impressive at first, the UFO's experts said, but much of the material has been previously published, has an unearthly explanation, or does not address the most burning questions about alien life. One report documented a flying potato. "For 70 years, people have been thinking it's been about to happen, and it never really has," said Paul Simones, who leads the Roswell UFO tour. "If they never produce anything, then we're just going to have to feel like they've blown a whole lot of smoke and tried to convince us there was no fire underneath." The sentiment cut across partisan divides. For those opposed to Mr. Trump, this was just another in long line of letdowns. The administration's release of documents related to assassinations of President John F. Kennedy and the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King haven't lived up to the hype either. Mr. Trump's critics have also posited that the UFO files are a distraction from the Iran war, gas prices, and possibly another set of more politically explosive files, those related to convicted sex offender Jeffrey Epstein. "They're just saying, look over here for the shiny thing while something else is going on," said Joey Fox, 50, who stopped at the festival during a cross-country move from Texas to Oregon. Mr. Trump's supporters blame the deep state. "I think maybe he doesn't even know because some things are so secret," said Tom Mills, a 79-year-old amateur ufologist who said he voted for Trump 3 times. "He can only release what he knows about." Mr. Mills now believes there's only one way he'll get the truth. "I hope I get abducted," the retired pilot said. Anna Kelly, a White House spokesman, said more UFO files will be released in the coming weeks, and Mr. Trump is more transparent president in history. While past administrations have sought to discredit or dissuade the American people, the president is focused on providing maximum disclosure to the public, Ms. Kelly said in a statement. Tom Jennings, a former mayor of Roswell, said he knew better than to get his hopes up. Past presidents, including Jimmy Carter, who in 1976 pledged to make public every piece of information the government had on UFOs, have teased declassification if not followed through. Still, mysteries have been big business for Roswell, especially since Mr. Jennings helped launch the UFO festival in the mid-1990s. The extraterrestrial extravaganza draws tourists from the country to a swath of eastern New Mexico desert that would otherwise go largely vanished. You have been listening to a reading of articles and features from the July 13th, 2026 issue of the New York Times. Your reader has been Erin. Thank you for listening.